Welcome back. Welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We're moving now into our first segment for the morning. Now, very important to make mention of, we're joined by a rep from the chamber, actually the president of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry. The conversation will be surrounding minimum wage and the fact that it should be wage in, so said the BCCI. So let's welcome the president. Good morning, sir. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
I think this is the conversation that a lot of people are actually looking forward to. We know the work of the BCCI in terms of streamlining business, and of course trying to provide the best advice to GOB when it comes to rollouts such as this. It is very important for folks to understand where we are and where we want to go with respect to wages or minimum wages for our country. So, Mr. President, let's go with BCCI's word on trying to get the minimum wage phased in. What prompted this?
For us, first off, I want to say that the Chamber has always supported an increase in minimum wage. There has been some conversations out there that suggest otherwise, but that's not the case, because at the end of the day, we understand and appreciate that the employee, the consumer, needs a little bit more buying power.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're hoping to get out of this. But for us, the phased-in approach that we've been advocating for and the use of a formula really stems from the ILO. It's not something new. The ILO prescribes that there's a balanced and evidence-based approach, which means that you have to look at all the factors, both the economic and, of course, the employee, and find a middle ground that can work. And so for us, we've continued to advocate for the phased approach. The last time I was here, we talked about the jump directly from $3.30 to $5.
Right.
And the impacts those would have. And we could go into a little bit more of those today.
Please.
But also to consider the fact that those will create shocks that may not be sustainable into the future.
Right.
All right? And so the reason for the phased approach will assist that, because at the end of the day, if you do it gradually, businesses, of course, will be able to adjust over time. And I go back to the example for Social Security, right? We were not against the increase, even though it took 13 years for those increases to come, but they were done gradually over time. So it wasn't one swoop and you had this huge increase, because that impacts both employers and employees.
Yeah, yeah.
In the same breath, you look at minimum wage, it's the same situation.
Yeah, and the buy-in process is it, that to me is it, because when you talk about, when you talk about that a while ago in terms of Social Security and their increase, if it wasn't phased in, the impact would have been significant. But people might not see it like that, especially with respect to the minimum wage. Look, from 3-something to 5-something, I want that, President. That's what I want. I think I need it. But is it feasible?
Well, that's a challenge there, because most businesses are still trying to recover. If you do a survey and you speak to our members, a number of businesses still have not taken their staff back to the 100% they were pre-COVID, right? So when you place this new burden, so to speak, onto the private sector, then it'll lead to things that may not be the required or wanted effect for the population on a whole.
Who is the general beneficiary that would gain this $5 minimum wage? And I ask this in respect to, most of this goes to private businesses, right? So the vendors that employ one person that assists them, does it apply to them? The person that has a mini mart, does that apply to them? How does that affect persons that have a fixed income?
Basically, any individual who is being paid at minimum wage at $3.30 and moving to $5 is going to be impacted.
Okay.
Now, the numbers out there vary, because there's a head count that's shown out saying, let's say 23,000, that's in that $3.30 range, right, to move up. But then you also have to consider, if John is making $4, then John needs to go to 5.
Yeah.
If somebody else is making $4.95, it's a 5 cents, but that person needs to go to 5. So it's not just the 23,000, which is the set that's actually sitting in the 330,
330,
but it's every level above that until you get to $5 that's going to be impacted. Based on our review and our numbers, you're looking somewhere around 96,000 persons that's actually going to be impacted.
Can we afford that?
And that's the question, because at the end of the day, like I said, it has to be sustainable.
Right.
Because the employer can only support so much. And while the government continues to say, well, they're there to make policy and create an enabling environment, it's really the private sector that has to drive economic growth.
Yeah, and it's, speaking of economic growth, we're looking at mostly the MSMEs. You know, and these MSMEs are the ones who are actually driving the workforce within this country. GOB is in the implementing phase of actually waiving, I think if I'm not excise, whereby if you're an MSME and you're making up to $1 million a year, somewhere around there. I'm not too privy with the information, but when you're importing something, they're actually going to waive that.
Right, they're supposed to be waivers.
How is that going to play into effect? Do you feel, or from the BCCI standpoint, that it's a point in the way forward to actually get this implemented at a faster rate?
It actually may place MSMEs at a disadvantage, because while you are in fact receiving the waiver on the duties, you are being considered for what is that carve out of the 20% of government spending that should be directed towards the MSMEs. You are now saying that, okay, John, you had your small business working out of your home. We're encouraging you now to come into the formal sector, which means you get registered. But if you want to employ anybody, your starting minimum wage has to be that $5.
But you might not be able to afford it at a startup.
Yes.
Right. And so what ends up happening is, to some extent, you're stifling my growth, because you're going to now almost force me to continue being that one-man show for a while longer, in order to be able to then
and you
build
still won't
up.
see profit or bill revenue.
And the minute you hire
Employ
somebody, then you are mandated then, once the law is changed, to then pay that higher
So then let's
minimum
talk
wage.
about the phase-out process that the BCCI is advising. How would you, what has been that conversation like? Because the way it sounds is that come January 1st, that's going to be the new law implemented.
Well, the point, I think, there is how it's implemented, because there is, of course, the conversation of, okay, we go straight to $5. Our position continues to be, it has to be phased.
Right.
So when we look at the OECD countries as an example, and you look at their minimum wage, the average is around 6.4% increase. And they do an increase generally year over year, right? We've had, what, 10 years since our last increase. So again, the formula that we've been advocating for would help to create that predictability, put triggers in place that, in fact, we could be looking at an increase every single year. Because it's going to be in small incremental bites that, one, the business community can adjust to, and two, the employee can, to some extent, expect a salary increase, so to speak, through a minimum wage adjustment year over year. But back to that point of the OECD, at 6.4%, in our advocacy, we've been actually looking at somewhere between 18 and 20%, which is 3 times that amount that the general population looks at in nominal value in those OECD countries. And with that, we would be starting somewhere around $3.98, $4. And then you do the gradual increase over the next 3 years. So it's not to say that we don't get to $5, and of course, any amounts into the future greater than $5, but it has to be in a stepped up gradual phase, so that everybody can adjust and it doesn't create the shocks the economy may not be able to handle.
Because that's the part that, you know, that eventually people might not be able to understand, that it is a shock. And like we mentioned, it must be a buying process from the public, because you'll continue to hear the rumbles. But at the same time, the public needs to understand the importance of a gradual increase. Now, from the standpoint of the BCCI, moving from what, $3.30 to about $3.90 something, or $4 at the start. Don't you think this is a little too high? Or what's the response like from?
It's a, look at it this way: $3.30 to $5 is a 52% increase.
Yes.
So generally, something that is lower, more palatable is what we've been looking at, and we feel that from our membership and the feedback that $4 is a nice starting point. It also helps to align, because when you look at, and I'll take the conversation to the living wage versus minimum wage. They're two different things, right? So your minimum wage is generally prescribed by law, and it's written there. So as an employer, you are required to pay this minimum for an employee you hire. The living wage looks at other aspects, and it's not only looking at the minimum wage. The living wage says, okay, this is what you need to survive, at least covering your basic needs. However, the living wage responsibility is not solely for the private sector. Actually, in a large part, it's for the government. Because then you start looking at the social assistance programs, your NHI, Social Security, food pantries, things of those sort. All the social assistance programs that generally should help to not only help you to get to that living wage, but also is only should be a complement to minimum wage. Because minimum wage, when you look at that, the scope of that social assistance, minimum wage is a very small portion of that. It can't be the end all do all to solve the issue of increasing salaries through the private sector.
Let me ask you, I think a question that a lot of folks are eager to get answered. How does this affect the public sector? How does this affect persons that are in the public service? And I ask that because when we talk about an increase of minimum wage in small businesses and the private sector, you know, naturally everything else going up. And so that livable wage no longer necessarily becomes livable for everybody else that is on a fixed income. So how does this phasing out help with that?
To some extent, I'll be honest, it doesn't, because there is a balance that has to be struck. However, as you increase, as you rightly said, there are other things that may increase. There may be the cutting back of hours, right, from an employee. So if I used to pay you overtime, that may be lost. If I used to give you your it's not non-financial, but your non-wage benefits like end of year bonuses, those may go, because I don't need to pay you $5. I need to find where that differential will come from. Right? There's also the training may be cut back. I used to offer training because I wanted to ensure that the limited skilled worker is being bumped up to continue to contribute to my organization. And then you may even find that there is a composition change in employment, where because now I need to pay $5, I used to pay minimum wage at $3.30 for what would be an unskilled worker. And you are a semi-skilled or a skilled worker. Would it not be easier for me to possibly hire a few more semi-skilled workers
or skilled,
and skilled workers and decide, you know what, I don't necessarily or can't afford to hire the non-skilled workers now.
What about, how does this affect the social security factor, the tax factor? How do we factor these in?
Everything gets impacted.
Yes,
so
everything goes up.
your social security, there may be no need for the first two wage bands, as an example, in the social security scheme, because if the minimum moves to $5, those may disappear. They're no longer relevant, right? And then in the case of the taxes, well, we know how that works. The minute you're above the 19.6 threshold,
you start paying tax.
You start paying taxes.
And that's it, depending on a 21% tax.
All right, dear brother.
And so, while the view is that there should be more disposable income being placed into the system, you may find that that's not the case, because and we've seen this happen many times in private sector, you have persons who may not want to move to that next level because it pushes them into a taxable bracket.
Yeah.
And automatically when you do that, your take home or your disposable income actually shrinks.
Yeah.
Right? So you have people who are kind of adverse to promotions because
Yeah.
of the tax
Yeah.
implications.
And that's the truth. But you know, there is an effect on the economy when it comes to this, and primarily, like I mentioned, and I always use this, man. We need for everybody to buy into these processes so that things could actually work. How does this affect the economy of Belize?
Again, we would not know the final effect. Some of the approaches that have been looked at suggest changes that may be adverse. Of course, there are some positives that can come out of this because at the end of the day, economic growth is what all of us are pushing towards.
Exactly.
Yep.
But I think we will never have I'll never have the right answer to say this will happen or this won't. There's just this list of things that could potentially happen. But I don't know that the technical persons in government are looking at all those aspects and have looked at what's the most likely options or likely elements to play out with this change.
Given the state of our economy right now and our GDP, are we in a position to afford this? Can we, and I'm asking this because this affects, yes, this is mostly for those that have private businesses, right? Everybody else that works for the public NGO comes with a fixed income. But can we afford this? We are going to go into January of 2023 with a flatline rate. We're in a global recession. The gas of prices keep increasing. Everything else keeps increasing. With this minimum wage increase, are we in a state that we can afford it? Can I still pay my rent?
I don't know if I can say we can afford it. We also have to look at the social aspect and determine if in fact we're not long overdue for the increase. And so it's something where it's like, put it this way, I don't know that there'll ever be a right time for increases in the cost of doing business from the private sector. But you have to recognize that there is a need for us to start looking at how we improve the standard of living for the end consumer, the employee. And the employer recognizes that. Hence the reason why the chamber has always been advocating that, yes, we don't have an issue. We will support the wage, the minimum wage increase, but it just has to be done in a balanced, transparent, and predictable fashion.
Yeah, because of course we must safeguard the MSMEs, like we mentioned. These are the folks who hire majority of these non-skilled, semi-skilled, skilled people, so that we could actually get things streamlined throughout the economy. I think you know, a phase-in is definitely the right buy-in, rather than to just knock these knock these MSMEs. Sure.
I wanted to piggyback a little bit on that, John, just because a lot of these MSMEs, they get loans.
Yeah.
They get small loans from their banks in order for them to get their businesses started up. What happens then when they're not gaining revenue and getting profit, and then they have to pay an employee? And how does that balance, how does that check and balance with how much they have to pay monthly for their loan?
Yeah, it definitely adds cost to doing business. But on that example, one of the things that we've also looked at as a part of the process and suggested that it be looked at by the consultants is these living wage employer programs. Now, those programs actually allow for businesses, and we have quite a number of businesses who are paying greater than the minimum wage, right? Now, remember we talked about the difference between living wage and minimum wage, and the fact that living wage is generally higher than minimum wage. And so employers who pay more than the minimum wage or are above with the living wage, that you should have a program that incentivizes more persons to be able to pay above living wage. And that helps then bragging rights for those companies. You know, you get a nice plaque, but also the fact that you could also provide incentives where maybe for the certification you get a percentage point off a loan that you're getting for business purposes. Right. You know, there are ways of finding, I guess, support for the business community by doing that. And as you alluded to the loan, it could incentivize that, you know what, I am a small business, but if I employ one person and I'm paying better than minimum wage and definitely higher than the living wage, or at living wage at least, that I can benefit by a reduction in the percentage on the loan that I'm trying to take out to advance my business. Right? So it's a give and take, and hence the reason the conversation I keep saying is the balanced approach. And it's not, listen, we didn't come up with this on our own. The ILO has been saying this, it's in their literature. All we're doing is saying, okay, taking the ILO's pronouncement and finding how that adapts to the Belize environment and ensuring that it works for everybody.
Finally for me, because with the constraints of time, so what's the conversation like, or where is the conversation with the BCCI and GOP?
Well, we are a part of the task force, so all of it is being funneled through the task force. And that's one of the things that we continue to promote, that in fact, while government is out there speech framing and saying that this thing will go to $5 regardless, we are of the opinion that it should be left for the task force to do their job.
Right.
Why put in place a task force and then you will say contrary out there? And there were concerns because, I mean, the consultant was, so why is it that the turnout at these town halls were so poorly attended? And the reason can only be surmised as the government already putting out statements that say, so as an employer, why would I go and, you know, invest time to attend some of these sessions? So you have to leave the process to see itself through, and we're almost there. Because the task force has been meeting quite regularly, I can tell you, and they're now at the point where they're looking to finalize a position that will go to the minister and by extension will go up to cabinet for them to consider.
What can we expect in regards to minimum wage increase, or perhaps a phasing out come January? What can employees and employers alike be expecting?
We will continue to advocate our position. We are saying that let's start somewhere around $4. And let's also put in place the formula so that it creates the triggers, so that once these increases are past us, that in fact there is a predictable way to ensure that the minimum wage is adjusted, whether it be yearly or every 2 years, that there's an adjustment done where it's palatable. And it also gives some level of predictability to the private sector, but also an expectation for the employee.
Does the employer have a chance or perhaps wiggle room to maybe get their finances in order when the phasing out comes to fruition?
The conversation didn't just start yesterday.
I know, but
so
you know
there should be preparation, and yes, we love to procrastinate.
Yes.
However, what we keep saying to members is prepare for an increase. We're not saying that increase is going to be $5, or sorry, moving to $5, but prepare for an increase because it will generally come. But we are very hopeful that our advocacy to ensure that it's phased and not this huge jump of 52% to $5 is taken into account in the recommendation, as well as the formula with the triggers that allow for a review to be done every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, whatever the case may be, but not let it lie for 10 years. And then you make these large leaps.
Is there finally, I know we're out of time. I have so many questions. Is there going to be a formula set in place for review? So what are you all going to do to assess how this particular rollout is going?
Yes, well, the formula has the triggers, and so
Okay.
you're looking at things, the GDP, the CPI, also looking at productivity, because all of that's important. And as you led me in that direction, it's interesting for you to take a look at what our productivity as a country has been over the last 10 years. It's not going in the right direction. Yet
Wow.
we're saying
Want to.
provide a minimum wage increase at a $5 mark.
I know we've been having this conversation for the past 10 years, but do you believe that at any point in time our economy was ever stable enough to sustain even up to a
An
$4
increase, yes.
increase?
I think we were in the past. I mean, pre-pandemic, pre all of the extenuating circumstances that have changed where we are today.
Yeah.
There were times in the past, I think, that we could say that, you know, it would have been an easier adjustment.
Yeah.
Take us back to Social Security and those adjustments.
Yeah.
It was difficult, but because it was taken in small little bites, it was easier to adjust, and you knew that the changes were coming, so you planned for it, you budget for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are out of time, but final words for our viewers in terms of where we are with the increase of minimum wage. What is the one thing that employees and employers are alike need to be prepared for?
First of all, the Chamber continues to say that a minimum wage needs to be adjusted. So we are not against the adjustment. We just say that it must be a evidence-based and balanced approach, and it has to be phased in so that there's predictability. So what I can say is employers will need to plan for some adjustments come January, and employees can expect that same adjustment in their paychecks. But not all of it necessarily trickles down to disposable income for the employee.
January 1st, 2023. Yes?
Or maybe the second being the first half.
I will not commit to a date. We can expect a change in the near future. We'll leave the dates to the government to determine.
That's right. But like we mentioned, there must be a buy-in to the entire process because it affects everybody. MSMEs, of course, the banks, and the people on alike. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Marcello Blake, my brother, president of the BCCI, my bro. Thank you for joining us this morning. And here's to wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we're about to take a break, April. Yeah. But when we come back, you know what the deal is never finished with them people?
Digi
wallet. Like, you got a Digi wallet too? You should have to mind. Oh my gosh. But Digi is going to join us. They'll be telling us all about Digi wallet and what to expect this Christmas season. Stay with us.